I'm Brianna Bosch and I own Blossom and Branch Farm. As a fifth generation farmer, I've learned a lot about different methods and techniques in farming and gardening, and I'm here to share with you the ones that we found to work the best. Welcome to the farm. Hey everyone, it's Bree here from the farm. Today we are talking about soil blocking again, but today we're going to be talking about soil blocking with an alternative to coconut coir. So coconut coir is a much better alternative to peat. As we discussed in our original soil blocking video where we talk about our peat-free recipe, we used coconut coir originally as a substitute for peat. There are some issues also with coconut coir, mostly being the amount of water used to get coconut coir desalinized enough for it to be usable in gardening. That is, to get most of the salt out of it, they use a lot of water. Also the transportation, so it has to travel a long way for us here in North America to get to that product. So there are still issues with coconut coir. The other issue that's brought up with coconut coir is that there are some labor practices that are questionable, and so we want to just try to minimize maybe the coconut coir. Now our potting base that we still use in this recipe is still the Fox Farms Coco Loco, which is still peat-free, and it does use coconut coir, but there's also a lot of soil in there. So our last recipe used coconut coir as that medium, that kind of binder. This uses a new product that we found. This is called Pitt Moss, and we're really excited that we found Pitt Moss. This is a recycled cellulose fiber paper product. You can actually see some little bits of paper and things in here. And this is a product that would otherwise end up in the landfill. So if this product wasn't made into this gardening amendment, this would be in the trash. So it's also made in the USA. It's made in North America. And so to us, that's a lot better than the coconut coir. It's just traveling less far. It doesn't use as much water, blah, 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 all that good stuff. Omri Organic certified. So that's also good to know. All right, so let's get to the recipe. So we talked about the two main ingredients, which are the Pitt Moss, not peat moss, okay, Pitt Moss, P-I-T-T moss, and our Fox Farms Coco Loco. The third ingredient is still gonna be the green sand, that mineral sediment green sand. So let's go ahead and whip up a batch. I have my sifted potting soil. We actually recommend sifting this potting soil just because it tends to have, it is a potting soil, it's not meant for seed starting, and so because it's a potting soil, it tends to have these larger chunks in here. These chunks can be problematic if you're doing the smaller soil blocks or even some of the bigger soil blocks because they're kind of big rocks and they're going to really interfere with your seedling's abilities to root into the block. That's what we're sifting. This is just a little sifter that fits right into a 5-gallon bucket, so that is super handy. And I'm going to do 2 parts of the potting soil to 1 part of the Pitt Moss. I like to mix up a batch of it in a separate tub, and then when I go to mix up my soil blocks, I can just take some of this and add my water, and I'm ready to go. I'm not having to do this recipe every time I'm making soil blocks. So it's already ready to go in a big bin, and then I'll add it to my water. Okay, so we're going to start with, again, we said 2 to 1. So 2 parts of the Coco Loco from Fox Farms, the potting soil, 2 parts of that to 1 part of Pitt Moss. Okay, so I did 3 scoops of the Coco Loco, so I'm going to do 1.5 scoops of the Pitt Moss. And here's kind of the only downside of this Pitt Moss is that it does tend to have some chunks in it. So any of these kind of larger chunks, I'm just taking and kind of breaking up a little bit with my hands. And we'll do that again when we mix this all together. So let's measure out 1.5 scoops of the Pitt Moss. You can use whatever measuring you want. If you just want to make small batches of this, you can just use a mason jar. If you want to do big batches, you could even use a 5-gallon bucket. Okay, so there's 1 part, here's a half part. So, and 1 to 2. So because we put in 3 scoops of the Coco Loco, here's a pretty big chunk. Just break that up. We did 3 parts of the Coco Loco. We're going to do 1.5 parts of this. I'm going to actually do about 3/4 of a part. It's about 1/2 to 3/4 of a part of green sand. You can, now again, just like the last recipe, as we're mixing this up, If you're finding that you want to put a little bit of Pitt Moss in or a little bit of soil, you can do that. You can adjust this recipe if you feel like you need to. And here is the mycorrhiza mix that we use. This is Bigfoot mycorrhiza granular. And the mycorrhiza is great. This also has some biochar and some worm castings in it. So we're going to go ahead and you can see that. I just kind of eyeball this. I'm going to do probably about 1/4 of a cup. So I would say relative to this, to our scoop, it's really just like filling out the bottom of the can. So it doesn't take much. We don't need much of that mycorrhiza in there. So we're just going to put about this much in there. All right, we want to mix it really thoroughly with our hands before we moisten. Okay, so again, I am keeping this bin pre-made. This is the dry mix bin. And then after I've mixed it up, I'm going to add it as I need it to my water and just make a little batch of the soil blocking mix at a time. But you really want to thoroughly blend this together. Now you can put your dash of cinnamon in here as well if you want to. We just happen to be out of cinnamon at the moment, so I'm not going to put it in, but that cinnamon that we use in our soil blocking mix, in the other version, you can pop over to the other video that has the coconut coir based recipe and check that out if you want to learn more about that. Alright, so this is pretty homogeneous now. We've got it pretty well mixed together. It's just like baking a cake. Okay, you want to mix all your dry ingredients before you mix your wet. So just to highlight the recipe again, it is 1 part of Pitt Moss to 2 parts of sifted Coco Loco by Fox Farms potting soil, and then about a 1/4 to 3/4 part green sand, and a scoop of granular mycorrhiza. We use Bigfoot, but you can use whichever brand you like the best. If you don't know how to make blocks, I would recommend checking out our last video with the coconut coir based recipe, our soil blocking 101 class, because that's going to give you all the details on how to form good blocks. For now, I'm just going to make sure my soil blocker is really nice and clean, and I'm going to add my water. Washing off your soil blocker first. A soil blocker is going to make much better blocks. So I mentioned that I only mix up a little batch at a time, okay? So I'm not going to mix up this entire bin that I made of soil blocking mix because that would make a whole lot. I would be left with a lot of extra. I just mix as I go. So when you're making this, you're going to take 2 to 1 of the mix to water, okay? So I have 1 part, and here's 2 parts. So let's say I was just going to make a small batch. I have 2 scoops of my mix, my pre-mixed recipe, and I'm going to do 1 part warm water. Okay, I know it sounds like that extra step to do warm water, but trust me, it helps a lot. Use my spatula to mix this up. Use a spatula to mix it up, and remember guys, it's best if you can to actually mix this up a few hours in advance or even the night before, because the longer it sits, the more all of this paper material will absorb the moisture and it's going to come together better. But if you have to, you can do it the day of. Just be sure if you're doing it the day of that you're using that warm water. That's going to help all these ingredients to hydrate. Alright, this looks pretty good. So again, that was a 2 to 1 ratio of water, of the potting mix to water. Pick it up, squeeze it out. Remember, you want some water, some moisture running out of your fingers. That's how you know your mix is right. All right, press and wiggle. You could scrape, but I'm using my special bin that has the rivets on the bottom, so I don't have to scrape. Ta-da! Beautiful blocks. Really, really nice. Now, as you're pressing, remember to reserve a little bit of that dry so that you can add it as this mix gets wetter. As you press out more and more blocks, it's going to get a little bit wetter. Alright, so we've been really happy so far with the performance of this mix. We always test this before we give any recommendations, guys, okay? So we've experimented a lot with various seeds turning blends, including just using compost, which really didn't work very well at all. But we've been actually starting some root vegetables, is what this tray is, some carrots and beets. These are turnips here, and so you can see they are doing quite well. We have some bigger straw flower as well that's been germinating in this mix. Everything is looking really great right now. So we're really happy to report that everything is looking good. These are making really nice soil blocks. In fact, if I had to choose a recipe, I would choose the Pitt Moss based over the coconut coir. I like the way it binds. I like that it doesn't have all those little fibers sticking out that sometimes can be kind of annoying with soil blocks. So I'm going to be doing all Pitt Moss from now on. I hope you guys join me. Remember that using peat in our gardens is something we should really try to be minimizing. So just keep an eye out for it when you go to the garden store. If your garden center isn't offering peat-free alternatives yet, ask them to do it. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe below and let us know what you'd like to see us talk about next.